The year 2025 began with a significant shift in the West's approach to supporting Ukraine. For months, a debate had simmered. It concerned the long-range missiles supplied to Kyiv. These weapons came with a condition. Ukraine could not use them to strike targets deep within Russian territory. This limitation was a source of constant frustration for Ukrainian commanders. They saw enemy logistics and command centers operating with impunity just beyond their reach. The fear in Western capitals was clear. Allowing such strikes could provoke an unpredictable escalation from Moscow. Now, in the spring of 2025, that policy has changed. The United States and key European allies have made a momentous decision. They have agreed to lift or significantly ease these range restrictions. This is not a minor adjustment. It represents a fundamental recalculation of risk and reward. The war in Ukraine has entered a new, perhaps more dangerous phase. The decision reflects a growing understanding. Ukraine needs greater freedom to defend itself effectively. It also signals a hardening resolve in the face of continued Russian aggression. The implications of this change are profound. This alteration in military aid is a direct response to evolving battlefield realities. Russia has intensified its own long-range attacks throughout late 2024 and early 2025. The imbalance was becoming untenable. This new policy attempts to level the playing field, albeit belatedly. Range restrictions were constraints imposed by donor countries. When Western nations supplied Ukraine with advanced missile systems, they came with caveats. These dictated how and where Ukraine could use these weapons. Primarily, they prevented targeting inside Russia, even if those locations launched attacks against Ukraine. The idea was to provide defensive capabilities, not to take the war deep into Russia. These limitations were due to fears of escalation. Strikes on Russian soil could be seen as a NATO attack, leading to a wider conflict. Before the lifting of range restrictions, Ukraine's military operated under a significant handicap. Imagine a boxer forced to fight an opponent who can step out of the ring to rest and rearm at will. This was the reality for Ukrainian forces. Russian military assets, crucial for sustaining the invasion, were often located just beyond the reach of Ukraine's most potent Western-supplied missiles. These included major logistics hubs where fuel, ammunition, and supplies were gathered. They included airfields from which bombers launched devastating strikes. They also included command and control centers coordinating operations against Ukraine. This inability to strike deep created an asymmetrical battlefield. Russia could project power into Ukraine from protected rear areas. Ukraine, however, could not effectively disrupt these operations at their source. This forced Ukrainian commanders to focus on defensive actions within their own territory. They had to absorb attacks rather than proactively degrade the enemy's capacity to wage war. While Ukrainian forces showed remarkable ingenuity and resilience, this limitation undoubtedly prolonged the suffering. It also increased the cost in Ukrainian lives and infrastructure. The strategic initiative often remained with Russia because of these sanctuaries. The lifting of restrictions allows for a more efficient allocation of military resources. With the easing of range restrictions, Ukraine now has access to the full potential of several advanced missile systems. Key among these are the American-made Army Tactical Missile System, or ATACMS. Different variants of ATACMS have different ranges. Some can strike targets up to 300 kilometers away. Previously, Ukraine often received older, shorter-range versions or faced limitations on their use. Now the longer-range variants can be employed against a wider set of targets. This significantly expands Ukraine's operational reach. It puts many more Russian military facilities within striking distance. European contributions are also crucial. Systems like the British Storm Shadow and the French SCALP-EG are air-launched cruise missiles. They also have ranges of over 250 kilometers, with some variants potentially exceeding that. These missiles are designed for precision strikes against high-value, well-protected targets. Think of hardened command bunkers, major ammunition depots, or key bridges. The ability to use these missiles without previous geographical limitations means Ukraine can disrupt Russian logistics and command structures far behind the front lines. The significance of these extended ranges cannot be overstated. A range of 300 kilometers allows Ukrainian forces to target nearly all of occupied Crimea. It allows them to reach significant portions of Russian territory bordering Ukraine. This includes areas where Russian forces have massed for offensives. This change fundamentally alters the calculus of the war. Section 5. The spring of 2025. catalysts for a policy shift. The decision to lift range restrictions in the spring of 2025 did not occur in a vacuum. Several critical developments through late 2024 and early 2025 forced a re-evaluation in Washington and European capitals. Firstly, Russia launched a series of intensified offensives. These offensives, particularly in the east and northeast, put immense pressure on Ukrainian defenses. Russian forces, learning from past mistakes, concentrated overwhelming firepower. They made incremental but worrying gains. This created a sense of urgency. The existing level of support was clearly insufficient to halt the Russian advance indefinitely. Secondly, Russia escalated its campaign against Ukrainian critical infrastructure. Throughout the winter of 2024 to 2025, power plants, heating facilities and water supplies were relentlessly targeted. This was a deliberate attempt to break Ukrainian civilian morale. It was also an attempt to cripple Ukraine's war economy. Western nations saw this as a brutal escalation by Moscow. It made the argument for restricting Ukraine's own responses seem increasingly hollow. If Russia was not observing any limits, why should Ukraine be so constrained in its self-defense? This question became harder to answer. The political landscape in some Western countries also evolved. Public opinion, while sometimes wavering, largely remained supportive of Ukraine. Section 6. Defending deeper. The strategic gain for Ukrainian sovereignty. The ability to strike targets deeper within Russian territory offers Ukraine significant defensive advantages. It is not primarily about taking the war to Russian civilians. It is about degrading Russia's ability to wage war against Ukraine. Key military targets include ammunition dumps. These are often large, vulnerable facilities. Destroying them can create immediate shortages for Russian artillery and frontline troops. This directly reduces the pressure on Ukrainian defenders. It saves Ukrainian lives. It makes holding the defensive line more sustainable. Another critical set of targets are command and control centers. Modern warfare relies on sophisticated communication and coordination. If Ukraine can disrupt or destroy Russian headquarters, it can sow confusion among enemy forces. It can slow down their operations. It can make their attacks less effective. Similarly, targeting troop concentrations before they can be deployed to the front lines can prevent future offensives. It can also disrupt rotation schedules, leading to fatigue and lower morale among Russian soldiers. This is a proactive form of defense. It aims to neutralize threats before they fully materialize. Section 7. Reshaping the battlefield. New dynamics in a protracted war. The lifting of range restrictions fundamentally alters the strategic dynamics of the war in Ukraine. For over 2 years, the conflict had, in many ways, been fought on terms largely dictated by Russia's ability to use its own territory as a sanctuary. This is no longer entirely the case. Russian military planners must now account for the vulnerability of their assets hundreds of kilometers from the Ukrainian border. This forces a significant recalculation. They must decide whether to pull valuable equipment further back, making it less efficient, or they must invest heavily in protecting these assets. This change introduces new uncertainties for the Russian command. Previously, they could concentrate forces and supplies with a degree of confidence. Now that confidence is eroded. The threat of a precise Ukrainian long-range strike is ever present. This can have a psychological impact on Russian troops. It can also disrupt the tempo of Russian operations. If supply lines are interdicted, if command posts are hit, if airfields are damaged, then offensive actions become much harder to sustain. Ukraine gains a greater ability to shape the battlefield, even without launching a major ground offensive. The new dynamic also affects the broader strategic balance. It signals to Moscow that Western resolve is not waning but potentially strengthening. It demonstrates a willingness to adapt to Russia's own escalatory actions. Section 8. The specter of escalation risks and Russian reactions. Allowing Ukraine to use long-range missiles against Russia carries significant risks. The main concern is potential escalation by Moscow. Russia has warned it would consider such actions a major provocation. President Putin has hinted at severe consequences. These could range from intensified attacks on Ukraine to actions against NATO. Western leaders take these threats seriously. Russia's response is difficult to predict. Moscow might retaliate symmetrically. This could mean more intense strikes on Ukrainian cities. It could also involve cyber attacks or covert operations. Russia might further destabilize regions where it has influence. The Kremlin will portray this as NATO's direct involvement. This narrative will be used to sow discord within the Western alliance. There is also the risk of miscalculation. A Ukrainian strike causing significant civilian casualties could provoke a disproportionate reaction. The fog of war is dense. Section 9: An uncertain dawn: Ukraine's future and global tremors. The future outcomes of this decision are multifaceted and uncertain. For Ukraine, the immediate effect is a significant boost in its defensive capabilities. The ability to strike Russian military targets at depth could help stabilize the front lines. It could disrupt Russian offensives. It could reduce the intensity of attacks on Ukrainian cities. In the best-case scenario, this could create conditions for a more favorable negotiated settlement in the future, or it could enable Ukraine to gradually regain more of its occupied territory. This provides a glimmer of hope for a nation fighting for its survival. However, the path ahead is fraught with peril. Russia will undoubtedly adapt its tactics. It may disperse its forces more widely. It may harden its defenses. It may also seek to escalate the conflict in new and unpredictable ways. The war is likely to become even more technologically advanced and destructive. The human cost, already immense, could continue to rise. Ukraine's success will still depend on a sustained flow of Western aid, not just in missiles but in all forms of military and economic support. The resilience of the Ukrainian people will continue to be tested. Globally, this decision sends a strong signal about the limits of aggression. It shows that major powers are willing to take greater risks to uphold international law and support a sovereign nation under attack.